Former President Trump's first criminal trial is set to begin on March 25th after a New York judge denied his bid to dismiss the hush money case against him. Trump is accused of falsifying records to hide a series of payments to his former fixer, Michael Cohen. For analysis of the day's proceedings and proceedings to come, let's bring in CBS News contributor and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson. Okay, Jessica, we're going to hop around here a little bit. Thursday was the big dramatic action was in a Fulton County courtroom. District Attorney Fani Willis, Nathan Wade, also one of the prosecutors in that case, took the stand. What's your assessment of this case, what's trying to be done, and where things stand at the moment?
So the legal question, of course, is whether the district attorney, Fani Willis, has a financial conflict of interest such that she, and therefore the rest of her office, need to be disqualified. That doesn't mean that nobody could prosecute the former president, but it means that a different government body would have to come in and prosecute. That would mean a huge delay. That's a big win for the former president. But even if that doesn't happen, I will say this was a great day for him. He wasn't in the courtroom. But the more that we talk about Fani Willis and the person who she chose to be the special counsel in this case, Nathan Wade, who she dated, the more we talk about questions of credibility, the worse it is for this prosecution, the more the public confidence in whether or not this is a fair and neutral process is eroded. So even if the judge says, you know what, no legal conflict of interest, you stay on the case, I think that the damage, or much of the damage, has already been done.
And is that assessment, Jessica, clearly I can understand the political point that would support. What about in the legal context? Does it change the state of play within the four walls of the courtroom?
It should not, in the sense that, and that's a very good point, there's obviously different, public confidence is different from can you move forward and prove your case? And I think it's important for people to remember this has nothing to do with the allegations against the former president. There's nothing in here that says maybe the actions that were described in the complaint didn't actually occur. This is whether or not Fani Willis has personal motivations, a personal stake in the case, so that she should not be the one to continue, because the public does need confidence in the criminal justice system. It doesn't say anything about the strength of the prosecutor's case against the former president.
Now to the New York hush money case. The judge gave lawyers a little more than 5 weeks before jury selection. One of the former president's lawyers took exception with that timing. Is that timing rushed? What do you make of the 25th date?
It's not rushed. They have been waiting on this state criminal case in New York for quite a while, and they were just waiting to see what happened in the other criminal cases. So obviously for Trump, he wants all of these cases to be delayed. Now, I think for people who are really hoping that the former president gets, quote unquote, justice in a courtroom, whether it be in New York or Georgia or in a federal courtroom in DC or in Florida, they were not hoping that this is the first case to go. It's arguably the weakest case, and or at least it's the hardest to prove. And it's the one that I think is most difficult for people to understand. People understand you took documents that shouldn't have been yours. Yeah. People understand you tried to thwart the peaceful transfer of power. This one's a bit more complicated.
Jack Smith in Washington would like a court date, but he's got to go through the Supreme Court first. The court gave him a week to file in this immunity question. He turned his homework in early. Why do you think he did that, and what do you make of his filing in that case where Donald Trump has requested presidential immunity?
Because he's proving that time is of the essence, that he doesn't need more time, and what he's really hoping is that the Supreme Court doesn't take this case at all. As you and I have talked about, he's hoping that they look at what the D.C. Circuit wrote in that per curiam opinion, 57 pages, very thorough on the question of presidential immunity, and he's hoping the Supreme Court just says, not it, and go ahead and go back to Judge Chutkan and let this trial proceed in the courthouse. That is the case that Jack Smith wants to and thinks he can move forward on.
Jessica Levinson, thank you for fielding all those different ground balls and all those different cases. We appreciate it.